All right, talk a little bit about foliage plant installation. In other words, things that you need to think about when you're doing a landscape inside instead of outside. This requires a little bit more planning than a lot of other properties do. However, some of the planning is exactly the same as if you were working with an outdoor landscape. You want to plan well in advance. But one of the things that you really have to be worried about is the building availability. Since these plants are going inside, are you able to move them during normal business hours, or are you going to be required to work after business hours? Some of that may depend on the company. Some of that may depend upon when people are open. You also might have to, for example, with a hotel, find out when their heaviest times of traffic are so that you can avoid working at those times. The trick with a lot of these, though, the largest plant you can have has to fit through the smallest door that's there. Oftentimes, that's the elevator door, but if you have access to a freight elevator, that may not be the smallest door. Sometimes the front door is the largest door, so you do have to go through and wander all of the doors to make sure all of the plants that you're bringing through will fit through the doors that they have to get through. Does the elevator have the opportunity to open up a ceiling tile that might be able to accommodate a slightly bigger plant if the elevator door is really, really tiny? But the nice thing about freighted elevators is their doors are usually a little bit bigger, and they often don't have carpets and things like that, so you don't have to worry about that stuff. Just like any other site, you're going to do a site analysis. Is there adequate lighting? Is it just some incandescent lights overhead? Is it near a window? Do they have fluorescent lights? What is their policy about lights on the weekend? Who is going to be watering these plants? What types of lights are there? Are they fluorescent? Are they incandescents? Are they LEDs? What happens on the weekend is a big thing. What happens at 5 o'clock? Do they leave the lights on all night long, which is just as bad for plants as leaving them off for long periods of time? Let's talk a little bit about light. Which one is better? We don't see incandescents very often anymore. You might find some older buildings still have a few lying around. We do see, particularly in offices, fluorescent lights. It's pretty close to natural light. They have pretty good wavelengths for plants, so they're not bad ones to deal with. So if we look at these right now, daylight is this one right here. So the upper left-hand corner is the daylight one, and that's what plants are used to. If you look at incandescents, you can see why incandescents do reasonably well because they've got lots of red light. Plants read red light, but they don't do blue light, which plants actually read as well. We look at fluorescence, which is kind of on the right-hand side. You do have some blue wavelengths, so plants can read that. You've got pretty decent red wavelengths, so plants can read that as well. But mostly what we're finding nowadays are some sort of LED light. So here we have in the top right-hand corner, again, roughly daylight. In the very bottom in the center, you can see what plants see. So plants see the blues and plants see the reds. So you want to look at those color-tuned LEDs that have a full broad spectrum, because if you get the warm white ones, notice they don't have the wavelengths that plants need. Temperature is usually a pretty easy one if you're in an office building, but if you have an atrium or you're trying to put plants by doorways, that could become a challenge. So if you have a hotel, for example, people are coming and going from a hotel almost all day long. So plants in a doorway are going to have pretty extreme temperature shifts, whereas plants in an office space are not going to have those extreme temperature shifts. Do the people prop the door open during the day? Does the HVAC run all day long and the people inside get hot, so they prop the doors open? Now suddenly you might have a possibility in the wintertime where your plants are below 50 degrees, and most of our tropical plants can't handle that for more than a few hours at the most. And if the temperatures are really cold, it might only take them a few minutes. So you do have to plan where your plants are going to go. These plants also need to be watered, and you're going to have to figure out how that's happening. Are you or some other company going to be maintaining these plants, including watering them? Or are you going to leave that up to the people who are in the offices and the hotels and things of that nature? You're going to want to make sure you get that in your contract. You're going to want to make sure you test the water to see the level of soluble salts, to see the pH, and you're going to want to test it regularly. Otherwise, you might start to see problems with your plants. But how are you getting water to all of these plants? You can't drag hoses like you do outside. So you have to have some system for getting water to your various plants. And then you have to think about what happens to get the water from the container where it's in into the plant. Most houseplant containers are going to have some sort of drainage on the bottom. The problem with drainage on the bottom is if you don't put some sort of container to capture that drainage, now your drainage runs out onto the floor or runs out onto the carpet, and you end up with perhaps slick spots or damage to the carpet. But if you have containers that have no drainage in the bottom, now you've got possibility of plants sitting in very, very wet soils. Most potting soils hold water really, really well. So those soils tend to stay wet. So sometimes the ideal solution is actually to take the old plastic nursery container that the plant came in and set that on top of a brick or something like that inside a decorative container. That way when you're watering it, some of the water is able to drain out, but the plant's not going to be sitting in water. Make sure the people who are watering your plants know how to water plants, and just don't dump gallons of water on them because, hey, it's Monday and we're watering. How many people are you going to need to move these plants around? Big plants are heavy. Big plants with soil in them are heavier, and big plants with soil in them that have been watered are even heavier. So now you have to think, if I've got many, many large, big plants, are there weight restrictions on the upper floors that I have to worry about? Those weight restrictions might not have anything to do with your individual plants, but the weight of all of your plants, plus the weight of all of the furniture and the weight of all of the people, might come close. Probably not, but it might. So you do have to think about that. Unlike outdoor landscapes, we can't use a skid steer or something like that. This is going to be a lot of manpower, dollies, those sorts of things to move plants inside. Highly recommend also you start moving with the large plants first and then move down to the smaller plants. Provide options for replacement. That's the thing that people want. Most of these plants are going to start to look not as good right after install. So install, they look fantastic. 6, 8, 12 months, depending upon the lighting and the temperature and things like that, they're probably not looking as good. So are you as a company providing replacements? Are you storing other things? Or are you willing to bring in this picture right here, new palm trees that look basically the same that you've kept in your greenhouses while you restore and reinvigorate those particular palm trees? Or are you going to worry about that at some other point? So make sure those types of things are in your contracts as you're dealing with your clients and thinking about their budgets. How are they going to deal with these plants as they start to not look quite so good? We take a look at the lower right-hand corner. Those are fairly easy office plants to care for. But are you the one going in there watering them? And when are you going to be doing that? It's going to be difficult. That looks like a call center. It's going to be difficult to do that if all the people are there. So you're going to have to go in after hours, or you're going to have to go in on the weekends, or you're going to have to make sure the office workers are responsible. And that leaves your plant subject to being treated not so nicely. If you look at the top left-hand corner, how are you going to water all those things that are on those floors? You have to make sure that you have some sort of water system available to be able to water those plants and prevent water from dripping all the way down to the lower floors. You'll see that's a hotel lobby, lots and lots of plants in that one. And I can guarantee they have a contract to maintain those things. Secure place to store all of your plants during install. Is there some sort of empty office or empty warehouse or a basement or a shed out back or some place that you can lock those plants up if you cannot get them all installed during one trip? Do you need ladders available for watering tall plants hanging from the ceilings or other places where it's very, very difficult to reach? And if you need ladders, what are the OSHA regulations for the state that you're in as far as climbing up and down ladders? Do you need hard hats to be able to do that? So those are things that you have to think about. If you are ever dealing with brand new construction, make sure they finish the building, and that's going to almost be a given. They're probably not even going to let you in the building if it's not finished, but you not only want the building finished, you want the HVAC running for several days, because that way they've settled all the kinks, the temperature has started to stabilize, and we know all the lighting is fully operational, and when they set it at 72 degrees, it actually is 72 degrees and not 78 or 83 or 65. Some of this is going to be personal preference on when you're watering. You can water before installation. That way, by the time they get to you, they've kind of dried out a little bit. No chance of spilling water all over the place, but they're harder to install. They're going to be a lot heavier, which means more shipping costs. You could water them at install, and that means you're running the risk that water is spilling over, but they are lighter to install and they are lighter to ship. The disadvantage there is if they come out of the warehouse dry, and they're dry when they get in, they might not look so great even though we know that they're going to recover. Most of our houseplant wholesalers are in Florida and other subtropical climates, and so the conditions down there are vastly different than ours. So you need to give them some time to acclimate to Ohio conditions or Indiana conditions or Tennessee conditions or whatever it is that you end up. You can't just take them from these outdoor growers in Florida and throw them into an office environment. You have to give them time to acclimate to lower levels of light, perhaps not the exact amount of water that they've been used to, and that can take months. For smaller plants, it might only take a couple of weeks, but for larger plants, it might take months to do this. If you're transporting them, make sure your vehicles are heated and cooled, because our tropical plants cannot be outside for very long periods of time. I've seen situations where simply the act of taking a plant that's unsleeved, like these ones in the bottom right-hand corner are sleeved, that's unsleeved from the garden center to the car, all you're doing is walking across the parking lot, and that plant suffers cold damage when it's really cold outside. It can take less than a minute at 30 degrees for tropical plants to show damage. Get the largest plants first. The reason for that is when you're moving the large plants, you're often doing that first thing in the morning or first thing when you get to the job, so you've got a little bit more energy. You might have more people available, but definitely the more energy thing is worth it. And then as you start to tire from moving everything around, you've got your smallest containers that you're doing last. Finally, and I recommend this to everybody, follow up with your client. Even if you are the one doing the maintenance of all of these houseplants, follow up with them. Do they like it? Is it behaving as they do? Is it performing as they do? Are there customers or clients or office workers saying anything about it? And if you're not the one doing the maintenance, you want to follow up with them to ensure that the company that's doing the maintenance is doing what they need to be doing to make sure that your designs look good. Okay, as always, got any questions? Don't hesitate to get in touch.